When I told my son I had just spent 3 weekends refinishing the deck at the cabin and couldn't wait for everyone to come up for Thanksgiving, he went quiet on the phone. Not the comfortable quiet of a man thinking, the tight, airless quiet of a man caught. Then his wife's voice slid into the line, smooth as river water over a flat rock. "Richard, we sold the cabin 7 months ago. Did Marcus not mention that?" I stood in my kitchen in Knoxville with a mug of coffee going cold in my hand. Outside, my neighbor's dog was barking at something in the hedgerow. A perfectly ordinary Tuesday morning in October. I had driven 4 hours round trip 3 Saturdays in a row to sand and seal that deck. I had replaced 2 rotted boards on the steps. I had restocked the firewood shed because I wanted my grandchildren to see the place the way it looked when their grandmother was still alive. "What did you say?" My son cleared his throat. "Dad, it's complicated." "Tell me which part is complicated about selling property that has my name on the deed." His wife jumped back in before he could answer. The market was incredible, and the offer came in fast. We had to move quickly. These things happen. We were going to call 7 months. I had been maintaining a cabin I no longer owned for 7 months. I set my coffee down before I dropped it. Said I would call back. Did not call back. Not that day. Instead, I drove to my truck, sat in my driveway with the engine running, and let myself feel the full shape of it. My wife Margaret had loved that cabin. We bought it in 1998, a rough A-frame on 23 acres outside Gatlinburg, paid $89,000 for it with money I earned running Caldwell Electrical for 11 years. After she passed, 5 years ago, I had given my son joint ownership, his name on the deed beside mine, a gift, not a loan. Something to keep him connected to the place his mother had loved. To sell it, both of us had to sign. I went back inside and called my attorney. Gary Whitfield had handled my business contracts and 2 real estate closings over the years. Steady man, not given to alarm. When I explained what happened, he was quiet for a moment. "Rick, that's a serious thing you're describing. If your signature appeared on a deed transfer and you did not authorize it, that's forgery. That's a felony in Tennessee. I know what it is. Do you have the original deed documents in your possession?" I did. I kept everything. 40 years running a business taught me that paper is armor. I found the original deed in my fireproof lockbox inside of 10 minutes. Verified my name, my notarized signature from 1998, and my son's name added in 2019 when I transferred partial ownership. Then I called a title company on Oak Ridge Highway and asked them to pull the closing records on the Gatlinburg property. The young woman who called me back the next afternoon sounded cautious, like she could tell from my voice that this was not routine paperwork. "Mr. Caldwell, the property at Ridgeline Road transferred on March 14th this year. Sale price $340,000. Proceeds distributed to joint account held by Marcus Caldwell and Diane Caldwell. And my signature appears on the transfer documents?" A pause. "Yes, sir. I need a copy of every page of that closing file." That night, I sat at the desk in my home office, where I used to do the books for Caldwell Electrical, and spread the photocopied documents under my lamp. The signature on the transfer deed looked like mine, the same way a photocopy of a key looks like a key. Close enough to fool a title clerk working through a stack of closings. Not close enough to fool a man who had signed his own name 10,000 times. I opened a fresh yellow legal pad and started writing. Not venting, not grieving. Facts. Property purchased $1,998, $89,000. Property transferred partially to Marcus, 2019. Gift. Market value at transfer approximately $210,000. No payment received. Sale price March of this year $340,000. Proceeds 0 to me. I kept writing. The coffee maker in the kitchen finished its cycle and went quiet. The neighborhood outside settled into the kind of deep Tennessee night where you can hear a truck on the interstate 2 miles away. I did not notice the time. College at UT Knoxville. 4 years. $72,000 in tuition, housing, and expenses. I had paid it in full because that is what fathers do. Graduate school application fees. LSAT prep. The year my son decided law school was his calling before he decided it wasn't. $8,400 gone and never mentioned again. The down payment on his house in Brentwood 6 years ago, $60,000, framed as a loan, understood by everyone involved to be a gift. His wife's restaurant, Locale, in the Gulch neighborhood of Nashville, opened 3 years ago with $120,000 of my money. The restaurant had closed 11 months later. Diane had called it a difficult market. She had not called to offer repayment. The joint investment account was the one that made my jaw tighten. After Margaret passed, my son had come to me with a proposal. He was getting into real estate development, he said. Small projects at first, flipping undervalued properties in East Nashville, building equity. He needed a capital base. Would I consider a shared account he could draw from for acquisitions and expenses, and we would split profits down the middle? I believed him because he was my son, and I had always believed him. I pulled up the transaction history on my laptop. 18 months of withdrawals, with notations like acquisition costs and due diligence and professional fees. I added them across 3 pages of the legal pad. $44,600. I searched for the properties he had supposedly purchased. Found nothing in the county assessor's records under his name, or any LLC I recognized. I sat back and took off my glasses and rubbed my eyes the way you do when you are not tired, but your body wants a moment to process what your mind already knows. My son had used me as a funding source for 11 years, carefully, patiently, with just enough gratitude and just enough forward-looking promises to keep me extending the next installment of faith. The cabin was not impulsive. The cabin was the final withdrawal. Total on the legal pad, $488,000 over 11 years, not counting the sale proceeds he had pocketed, which brought it to $828,000. I closed the legal pad, turned off the desk lamp, and went to bed. Not because I was done, because there was nothing more to do that night, and clear thinking requires sleep. In the morning, I called Gary Whitfield before 8. I need to file a police report for forgery and deed fraud. I also need to understand every civil remedy available to me, and I need to do both of those things today. Gary was quiet for 2 seconds. Rick, I want to make sure you've thought this through. This is your son. He forged my name on a real estate transfer and kept $340,000. I've thought it through. Okay, come in at 10. Bring everything you have. The Knoxville Police Department's Financial Crimes Division was a windowless office on the 3rd floor of a building that smelled like industrial cleaning fluid and old coffee. The detective who took my report was a woman named Sandra Briggs, around 40, with the efficient manner of someone who had heard every variety of family betrayal and stopped being surprised by any of them. She reviewed the documents I had brought, the original deed, the closing file, my legal pad, the bank statements. Mr. Caldwell, the signature comparison alone is enough to open an investigation. The fact that the proceeds went entirely to your son and his wife, and not to you despite joint ownership, strengthens the case considerably. She looked up. Has he contacted you since you discovered this? He knows I know. I have not spoken to him. I'd advise you to keep it that way until we've had a chance to pull financial records and speak with the title company. Understood. I drove from the police station to Gary's office. We spent 2 hours mapping out the civil case alongside the criminal report. Unjust enrichment, breach of fiduciary duty, conversion of jointly held assets. Gary had a forensic accountant he used for business litigation, a man named Phil Denton, who could trace every dollar if needed. How long? I asked. Civil case could take a year or more. The criminal investigation moves on its own timeline. Gary folded his hands on his desk. Rick, what outcome are you looking for? Full recovery? Public accountability? Something else? All of it, I said. Every dollar he took, and consequences he can't pay a lawyer to make disappear. Gary nodded slowly. Then we do this right. I drove home through lunchtime traffic. My phone had 7 missed calls by the time I parked. 3 from my son, 2 from his wife, 2 from a number I did not recognize. I listened to my son's voicemails standing in my kitchen. His voice moved through the stages the way weather moves through Tennessee in spring, starting clear and ending in thunder. First message. Dad, I can explain. The offer was a cash deal and the timeline was brutal. I was going to talk to you about the split. Call me. Second message. I know how this looks, but you need to hear the full picture before you do anything. Please. Third message. Dad, I know you went to Gary Whitfield. His paralegal is a client of Diane's. Just talk to me before you make a decision you can't take back. I deleted all three, made a sandwich, and ate it standing at the kitchen counter looking out at my backyard. Margaret had planted a Japanese maple near the back fence 20 years ago. It had grown into something spectacular, 10 feet tall, branches going crimson every October like clockwork. She would have known exactly what to say about all of this. She always did. I finished the sandwich, rinsed the plate, went back to my desk. Phil Denton spent the next 2 weeks going through everything I could provide: bank records, receipts, the investment account transaction history, the restaurant incorporation documents. He was methodical and quiet, the kind of man who communicates in spreadsheets and lets the numbers do the talking. His report arrived on a Thursday afternoon, 42 pages with a summary at the front that I read 3 times. Of the $44,000 from the investment account, Phil could account for $1,200 in anything resembling legitimate property acquisition costs. The remainder had been spent on private club memberships, luxury hotel stays, a vehicle lease I had not known about, and cash withdrawals with no notation. There was no East Nashville real estate portfolio. There had never been one. The restaurant was worse. Of the $120,000 I had invested, Phil found $31,000 in actual restaurant startup costs. The balance had gone to a second checking account in Diane's name alone, then out in transfers to vendors Phil flagged as likely shell entities registered to addresses that turned out to be UPS store mailboxes. I read that section twice. Slower the second time. My son had not made bad investments. My son and his wife had run a systematic extraction. The restaurant was not a failed dream. It was a mechanism. I added Phil's report to the evidence folder I had been building. Green tabs for bank records, blue for real estate documents, red for the investment account analysis, yellow for the restaurant records. I made 3 copies. One for Gary, one for Detective Briggs, one in the fireproof lockbox. The next evening, my phone rang. Number I did not recognize. I answered. Mr. Caldwell? A man's voice, cautious. My name is Brian Okafor. I'm an attorney representing Marcus and Diane Caldwell. I was hoping we might have a preliminary conversation before this situation escalates. It has already escalated, I said. The police are involved. I understand. My clients would like to explore a private resolution. Given the family relationship and the complexities involved, it might be in everyone's interest to handle this quietly. I leaned back in my chair. In my working life, I had negotiated contracts with general contractors, developers, insurance adjusters, and building inspectors. I recognized every flavor of the word quietly. What does your client consider a private resolution? A repayment schedule, perhaps beginning with the cabin proceeds, some acknowledgement of error, and a mutual agreement not to pursue further legal action. What your client considers an error, the state of Tennessee considers a felony. We're past private resolution. But thank you for calling. I ended the call. Made a note on my legal pad. Opposing counsel retained. Settlement offer declined. The following week, I had lunch with my oldest friend, a man named Roy Castillo, who had worked for me at Caldwell Electrical for 20 years before I sold the business. Roy had known my son since Marcus was 11 years old. We met at a diner on Chapman Highway where the coffee came in mugs the size of soup bowls and nobody bothered you. I laid out the facts simply. No embellishment, no emotion. Just what had happened. Roy sat with it for a long moment, his coffee cooling in front of him. Rick, I want to say, I'm surprised. He shook his head. I saw how Diane operated when they came to your retirement party 2 years ago. She treated your house like a hotel and Marcus treated you like a cash machine with a heartbeat. He paused. What can I do? Nothing yet. But I wanted someone who knew the whole picture. How are you holding up? I thought about that honestly. I'm not angry the way I expected to be. I feel like a man who discovered dry rot in a wall he thought was solid. You're not angry at the rot. You're angry at yourself for not inspecting it sooner. You deal with it. You rebuild. Roy nodded. Margaret would have spotted Diane from 50 yards. I know. I picked up my coffee. I did too, honestly. I just kept hoping I was wrong. On a Thursday in late October, Detective Briggs called. Mr. Caldwell, I wanted to let you know we've formally presented the forgery evidence to the Knox County District Attorney's Office. They've accepted the case for prosecution. Your son and his wife will be contacted for voluntary interview. If they decline, warrants will be issued. I thanked her, hung up, sat in my truck in the parking lot of a hardware store where I had gone to buy weather stripping. The engine ticked as it cooled. 2 weeks since I had spoken to my son. 11 missed calls total, 4 from him, 3 from his wife, 4 from numbers I had blocked after the third call from his attorney went the same way as the first. I went in and bought the weather stripping. That same week, I called Gary to discuss the estate. I had updated my will after Margaret passed, leaving everything to Marcus. The house in Knoxville, valued around $680,000 in the current market, my retirement accounts, just over $490,000. The proceeds from selling Caldwell Electrical 5 years ago, much of which was still invested, roughly $1.1 million. Life insurance, $250,000. Total estate somewhere above $2.5 million. I wanted to change every single line of it. Gary walked me through the options the same careful way he approached everything. Revocable trust, irrevocable trust, outright charitable bequest, combinations. What matters most to you? He asked. That he gets nothing, and that whatever I built goes to something real. Then I'd recommend an irrevocable charitable remainder trust with a specific exclusionary provision and documented rationale. It's the hardest structure for anyone to challenge. What about challenge-proofing it? With Phil Denton's audit report, Detective Briggs's case documentation, and a clear written statement of your reasons, any challenge would be nearly impossible to sustain. Tennessee probate courts give significant deference to testamentary freedom when the reasons are documented and the grantor is clearly competent. Start drafting, I said. The charity took me 3 days to decide on. I thought about the trades. 38 years in the electrical business, starting as a journeyman at 24 with a truck and a used tool set, building a company that employed 61 people at its peak. I had brought in apprentices every year for 3 decades. Some of them were now running their own outfits across the Southeast. I called a contact I had at the Tennessee College of Applied Technology, asked about their apprenticeship scholarship fund, talked to their development director for 40 minutes, came away with a clear picture of what an endowment could do. $750,000 in scholarships over 20 years. Electricians, plumbers, HVAC technicians, welders, young people learning trades that made things work, that built things that lasted. I called Gary back that afternoon. UT Foundation holds the assets. Annual distributions to TCAT apprenticeship scholarships. My son is specifically excluded with a documented rationale attached to the trust instrument. I'll have a draft to you by end of next week. I signed the trust on a quiet Friday morning in Gary's conference room. His paralegal as witness, Gary as notary. The fountain pen I used had been a retirement gift from my crew at Caldwell Electrical, my name engraved on the barrel. I used it deliberately. 4 signatures, each one a door closing. Afterward, I sat in my truck in Gary's parking lot with the engine running and the heat on against a raw November chill. Knoxville was beginning its slow slide toward winter, the trees mostly bare, the sky a flat gray that could mean anything. My phone buzzed. Text from Roy. Heads up. Marcus and Diane are at the East Tennessee Business Council dinner tonight, the one you've been going to for 15 years. Roy's source at the venue confirmed they bought tickets 2 days ago. Late registration. I read it twice. Then I read it a third time. The East Tennessee Business Council annual dinner was the event I had sponsored for 11 consecutive years through Caldwell Electrical and continued sponsoring as a private patron after the sale. 200 business leaders, contractors, developers, attorneys, people who had known me for decades and had also, in the past month, apparently been hearing a version of events from my son that did not match reality. I had discovered this the previous week when my insurance broker, a man named Dale Hutchins, who had carried my business policies for 20 years, caught me at the gas station and said, careful with his words, that he had heard my son was having some trouble and hoped the family could work things out. When I asked what he had heard, Dale looked uncomfortable and said Marcus had mentioned some kind of misunderstanding about a property sale and that I had overreacted by involving attorneys. I had thanked Dale for telling me and gone home and opened a new document on my computer. For the next 4 days, I had built a presentation, not an emotional appeal, a timeline, dates, dollar amounts, document references, Phil Denton's audit findings summarized in plain language, the forgery evidence outlined in 4 bullet points, the criminal case status noted at the bottom. 14 slides total. Clean, factual, the kind of presentation you bring to a board meeting when you want people to stop speculating and start seeing. I had sent the file to the event venue's AV coordinator on Monday, with a note from Gary authorizing its use should the need arise. The coordinator had confirmed receipt without asking questions. I had not planned to use it. I had not planned to go to the dinner at all. I texted Roy back. I'll be there. The venue was the Tennessean Hotel's grand ballroom. White linens and candles. The kind of room that made Knoxville feel bigger than it was. I arrived at 6:15, signed in at the registration table, found my usual seat at a table near the front with a group of contractors I had worked alongside for years. Phil Marsh from Marsh Plumbing, Carol Yates from Yates HVAC, Tom Reeves, who ran the largest general contracting outfit in Knox County. Tom leaned over when I sat down. Glad you came, Rick. Wasn't sure after the... He stopped. Well, you're here. I'm here, I said. Dinner service moved through salad and a main course of beef tenderloin. I ate, answered questions about what I had been doing in retirement, asked about projects, listened to Tom complain about material costs. Normal rhythms. But I felt my son and his wife in the room, the way you feel a change in air pressure before a storm. I spotted them during dessert. Back corner table, late placement, nowhere near where the longtime attendees sat. My son in a suit that cost more than it should have given his stated income. His wife in a dress chosen for an audience. During the MC's announcements, while people were still finishing their coffee, my son stood up. He walked to the small stage near the podium and picked up the microphone with the ease of a man who had rehearsed. I apologize for the interruption. His voice carried well. He had always been able to project. Many of you know my father, Richard Caldwell, and you know what he built in this community over 40 years. I know him as my dad, and right now, there's a painful misunderstanding between us that has gotten out of hand. He looked toward my table. I did not look away. I made mistakes. Mistakes I'm accountable for. But I'm asking publicly, in front of people who love us both, for a chance to sit down and make it right. Dad, can we talk? He extended his hand. The room turned. 200 people, most of whom had heard some version of this story from one side, waiting to see what I would do with the other. I stood, buttoned my jacket, walked to the stage. My son reached to hand me the microphone. His eyes, up close, held something I had not expected. Not manipulation now. Fear. I took the microphone. I looked out at the room. Phil Marsh at my table, Carol Yates, Tom Reeves with his arms folded, Dale Hutchins, 2 tables back, looking like he wished he had stayed home. The AV booth at the back of the room, where I could see the young coordinator with his hand near his laptop. I appreciate the opportunity, I said. Since we're here, and since a number of you have heard pieces of this story, I want to share the complete picture. I nodded toward the AV booth. The presentation appeared on the screen behind me. 38 years ago, I started Caldwell Electrical with a used truck, $1,200, and a journeyman's license. I sold it 5 years ago for $1.8 million. Everything I built went to my family first. The first slide. A simple timeline. Education expenses, $72,000. House down payment, $60,000. Restaurant investment, $120,000. Investment account, $44,600. Cabin purchase, $180,000. My son's college education, his first home, his wife's restaurant, a shared investment account for real estate he told me he was developing. I let the room read the numbers. The restaurant never turned a profit. The real estate portfolio does not exist. My investment account was drawn down to cover private club memberships, hotel stays, and vehicle leases. Phil Denton's audit summary appeared. Line items, categories, totals. This March, I learned my son sold a property we jointly owned. He did not contact me. He did not obtain my consent. A forensic document examiner has confirmed that my signature on the transfer deed was forged. 2 slides on the forgery. Side-by-side signature comparison. The title company records. The distribution of sale proceeds to an account I had never held. The room had gone completely quiet. Not the polite quiet of people being respectful. The still, breathless quiet of 200 people processing something they had not expected. Knox County has an active criminal investigation. I have filed the relevant civil claims. My son is correct that I have retained an attorney. I paused. He mentioned mistakes. I want to address that word directly. A mistake is miscalculating a materials estimate. A mistake is missing a deadline. What happened here was not a mistake. It was a sustained and deliberate decision, made over more than a decade, to treat my trust as a resource to be managed and depleted. My son had not moved from the stage beside me. His wife, at their table in the back, had gone very still. This week, I signed an irrevocable trust. My entire estate, this house, retirement accounts, investments, approximately $2.5 million total, will fund apprenticeship scholarships at the Tennessee College of Applied Technology when I die. Electricians, plumbers, HVAC technicians, young people who want to learn a trade and build something real. So I looked at my son directly. You asked publicly for forgiveness. I'll tell you what I believe publicly. Forgiveness is a private matter between a man and his conscience. What happens in courts and county records is a different matter entirely, and it will proceed on its own timeline regardless of what either of us feels. I set the microphone back in its stand. Thank you for your patience. Enjoy the rest of the evening. I walked back to my table. The applause started before I reached my seat. It spread across the room the way applause does when it is genuine, not polite, building, and sustaining. Tom Reeves was on his feet, Carol Yates, Phil Marsh. Within seconds, most of the room was standing. I sat down. Did not look back at the corner table. Phil Marsh leaned close to me. Rick. I heard his version 2 weeks ago at a chamber breakfast. Completely different story. There usually is one, I said. By the time the MC reclaimed the stage, my son and his wife had left the ballroom. I heard the exit doors close behind them during the applause. I did not turn around to watch them go. Roy found me near the coat check at the end of the evening. He did not say anything, just shook my hand and held it an extra second. Margaret would have enjoyed that, he said. She would have thought it was unnecessary, I said. Then she would have enjoyed it. The drive home took 20 minutes on clear roads. I made a cup of tea in my kitchen, stood at the window, looking out at the backyard where the Japanese maple had gone bare for winter, its branches reaching in all directions against the dark sky. I thought about my wife planting that tree when Marcus was 9. He had helped her dig the hole. I finished my tea and went to bed. The following days moved at a different pace than the weeks before. The weight of anticipation, the grinding vigilance of knowing the next move was coming, was gone. I repaired the gutter along the east side of my house, had Roy over for dinner on a Wednesday, and we watched the Vols game and argued about the offensive line the way we had been arguing about it since 1989. My phone showed missed calls the first 2 days after the dinner. My son, his wife, a number I did not recognize that was probably the attorney again. On the third day, nothing. On the Friday of that week, Gary called. 2 things. First, Morrison and Okafor, your son's attorneys, have filed a motion to dismiss the civil suit on the grounds of promissory estoppel, essentially arguing that your prior pattern of financial support constitutes an implicit binding promise to continue. Can they win that? No. Tennessee courts have been clear on this, and with Phil's audit documentation showing the misrepresentation behind the financial requests, their theory falls apart under any real scrutiny. Their lawyer knows it. Gary paused. Second thing. Detective Briggs called me this morning. Your son and his wife have agreed to a voluntary interview next Tuesday. The DA's office is moving. I wrote it on my legal pad. Voluntary interview. Tuesday. Gary, the civil suit. Can we add Roy Castillo's potential testimony about the investment representations Marcus made? Roy was present when my son pitched me the real estate partnership. Yes. Get me Roy's availability. I called Roy from the truck. Explained what I needed. Roy said 3 words. Name the date. The Sunday before Thanksgiving, I drove out to Gatlinburg, parked at the end of Ridgeline Road, where the old cabin had been. The new owners had been there already. You could see changes from the road, fresh paint on the exterior, a new garage door. The deck I had refinished in the spring was still there, though. The cedar planks I had sanded and sealed over 3 weekends. I sat with the engine running and looked at it for a few minutes. Then I turned around and drove back to Knoxville. Margaret and I had bought that cabin the year after Marcus was born. We had spent every 4th of July there for 19 years. I had taught my son to fish in the creek behind the property. He had caught his first trout there at age 7, and we had a photograph of it somewhere. Marcus holding the fish up with both hands, grinning the enormous grin of a boy who had just discovered what it felt like to earn something. I wondered sometimes when that boy had stopped existing and this one had taken his place, whether it had been gradual, a slow replacement of values, or sudden, a single decision at some point to treat the people who loved him as assets to be managed. I did not have an answer. I was not sure it mattered. The criminal case moved into December. My son retained a second attorney, a criminal defense specialist from Nashville. Diane retained her own, a different firm. Detective Briggs kept Gary informed of the material developments. 2 days before Christmas, Gary called me at 7 in the morning. Rick, the DA's office called. Marcus and Diane have agreed to a plea arrangement, formal charges of deed, fraud, and forgery. In exchange for guilty pleas, they avoid trial. Sentencing in February. What does sentencing look like? Suspended sentence contingent on full restitution of the cabin proceeds, $340,000, to be paid to you within 18 months. Felony on both records. Probation for 2 years. Community service. I sat with that. No prison time? Given no prior record and the restitution agreement, the DA felt this was the appropriate outcome. Rick, a trial could take 2 years and the outcome isn't guaranteed. This gets you the money back and the felony on their records. The civil suit? We can continue pursuing the investment account and restaurant funds separately. Phil's audit gives us strong grounds. Continue? I said. All of it? Gary paused. Rick, this is going to be a difficult Christmas for them. Gary, they spent 7 years making strategic decisions. This Christmas is one of the outcomes of those decisions. I looked out my kitchen window at the Japanese maple, bare and beautiful in the December light. I did not make this hard for them. They made it hard for themselves. I know. I just wanted to make sure you were at peace with how this resolves. I thought about the word peace. Whether it was the right one for a man sitting at his kitchen table a week before Christmas, his only son facing sentencing in February, an estate that had been carefully redirected to young strangers who would learn to work with their hands and never know whose loss had funded their opportunity. I'm at peace with the facts, I said. That's enough. I spent Christmas Day at Roy and his wife Linda's house. Their daughter and son-in-law came, and their 3 grandchildren, who were between the ages of 4 and 9, and ran through the house like weather systems. I ate too much. Helped Roy's son-in-law fix a malfunctioning garbage disposal after dinner because 40 years of electrical work had also taught me more about plumbing than most plumbers would admit, and drove home in the early evening through Knoxville streets hung with lights. My house was quiet when I got back. I had decorated modestly. A wreath on the door, a small tree in the living room that I had put up mainly because Margaret had always put one up, and the absence of it felt like capitulation to something I was not ready to capitulate to. I made tea, sat in my reading chair, thought about the year. My phone had 23 messages from my son over the preceding 2 months. I had listened to the first 4. The 5th one, left on a Sunday evening in late November, I had started listening to and stopped when I heard him crying. Not because it moved me toward forgiveness, because I did not want the sound of it to become the thing I remembered about him. I wanted to remember the boy with the trout at Ridgeline Creek. I deleted it without finishing it. In January, I received a letter from the TCAT development director. The foundation documents had cleared their board review. The Harold and Margaret Caldwell Trades Apprenticeship Endowment was formally established, named by my direction for both of us, because she had believed in working with your hands long before I did. First scholarships would be awarded in June. I drove to the TCAT campus on a Tuesday and met with the development director in person, walked the machine shop, the electrical lab, the HVAC simulation room, watched students in their second year of apprenticeship working through wiring diagrams and equipment diagnostics with the focused intensity of people who had chosen something specific and were serious about it. A young man named Darius, 20 years old, was troubleshooting a 3-phase motor controller with his instructor. He was methodical. He checked his voltage readings twice before moving to the next step. The instructor caught me watching. "Strong student," she said quietly. "Works 2 jobs to pay tuition." I nodded. Kept watching Darius check his readings a 3rd time, just to be certain. On the drive home, I called Roy. "How are you spending the spring?" I asked. "Linda wants to go to Hilton Head," he said. I told her I'd think about it. "I'm thinking about doing some work on the house. The back porch needs rebuilding." "I'll help," Roy said immediately. "I know you will." My son's sentencing was in February, a Thursday morning at the Knox County Courthouse. I did not attend. Gary represented my interests in the restitution order. He called me that afternoon. Guilty pleas entered. Felony convictions on record for both. Restitution order of $340,000 to be paid to you within 18 months. 2 years probation each. 200 hours of community service each. Suspended sentences contingent on compliance. "Good," I said. "They looked rough, Rick." "For what it's worth." "It's worth something," I said honestly. "Not enough to change anything, but something." After we hung up, I sat in my reading chair for a while without doing anything in particular. The afternoon light came through the front windows and moved slowly across the floor, the way it does in winter, long and low. The Japanese maple in the backyard was still bare. A few more weeks until the first leaves came. My son would spend the next 2 years of his life navigating probation and community service and the slow work of financial consequence. I did not know whether that would change him. I did not know whether he would eventually become someone I could sit in the same room with and feel something other than the careful, necessary absence of feeling I had cultivated since October. What I knew was this. I had given an enormous portion of my life and my resources to a person who had treated both as instruments. I had finally stopped. The stopping was painful and correct simultaneously, the way certain repairs are, the ones where you have to cut out the damaged section entirely before you can restore function to the rest of the system. The foundation would award its first scholarships in June. Darius, the young man with the motor controller and the methodical hands, was on the short list. I had a porch to rebuild in the spring. The Japanese maple would be full red by October. I had work to do.